The twin suns of the colony world hung low in the sky, painting the ruined valley in red and gold. Smoke rose in thin spirals from shattered buildings, and the wind carried the sharp smell of burned metal. The war had ended months ago, but the scars of it still clung to the land like stubborn shadows. Elias Ward walked through the broken streets with his pack slung over his shoulder. He was a human engineer, stationed far from home. His job was simple: maintain supply lines, repair what could be repaired, and keep the small garrison of soldiers alive on this half-forgotten world. But today his path had taken him somewhere different. Down in the valley, tucked between collapsed towers, he saw the refugee camp. Smoke from cooking fires curled into the air. Fabric shelters flapped in the dry wind. The people living there were not human. They were the Tyrell, a tall, slender alien race with pale skin that shimmered faintly in sunlight. Once proud, now they were broken, scattered, and weary. Humans and Tyrell had a long history of mistrust. They had not fought full wars, but there were skirmishes, misunderstandings, and bitter words. Neither side truly trusted the other. Elias had been warned to keep his distance from the refugees. "Not your problem," his commanding officer always said. "They don't want our help and we don't owe it." But Elias was not the kind of man to ignore suffering. As he approached the edge of the camp, his boots crunching over dust and rubble, curious eyes followed him. The Tyrell whispered in their melodic language. A few turned away. Some glared. He felt the weight of their stares but kept walking. He told himself he was only passing through, checking the supply depot on the far side of the valley. But as he moved closer, a sharp sound cut through the air, metal screeching followed by a scream. Elias turned his head quickly. Not far from him, a massive cargo lifter, half broken and leaning on its side, was shifting under its own weight. A small figure stood beneath it. It was a child. The girl had skin like moonlight and large eyes that glowed faintly blue. She couldn't have been more than 8 or 9 in human years. She had been playing near the unstable machine, perhaps searching for scraps. Now as the lifter creaked and tilted, she froze in terror. The machine groaned. Metal bolts snapped. A shadow fell over the girl. Elias didn't think. He dropped his pack and sprinted. "Move!" he shouted, though he knew she wouldn't understand his words. His boots pounded the dirt. His lungs burned, and for a second he thought he wouldn't reach her in time. But he pushed harder, throwing himself forward. With a burst of strength, he grabbed the girl and pulled her clear just as the cargo lifter crashed to the ground. The impact shook the earth. Dust filled the air. Elias shielded her with his body, rolling across the ground. Shards of metal scraped his arm, drawing blood, but he barely noticed. He held the child close until the roar of falling debris faded. Silence followed. Slowly, Elias lifted his head. The girl's wide eyes stared up at him. She was trembling but alive. "You're okay," Elias whispered softly, even though she couldn't understand. He brushed dust from her face and smiled. "You're safe." Around them, Tyrell refugees had gathered. Their voices rose in shock and confusion. Some looked at Elias with disbelief, others with suspicion. A few simply stared at the crushed lifter, realizing how close the child had come to death. Then, pushing through the crowd, came a tall figure. She was striking, taller than Elias by a head, her skin a pale silver that shimmered under the twin suns. Her long, dark hair fell across her shoulders, and her eyes glowed with a fierce, protective light. She moved with the authority of someone used to command. The girl broke free of Elias and ran into the woman's arms. "Mother!" she cried in the Tyrell tongue. The woman knelt, embracing her daughter tightly, her gaze lifted, locking on Elias. For a moment her face was unreadable. There was relief, yes, but also suspicion and something else, something guarded, as if she couldn't decide whether this human was a friend or a danger. Elias stood slowly, brushing dust from his uniform. His arm still bled where the metal had cut him, but he ignored it. He met the woman's eyes and gave a small nod. "I couldn't just stand by," he said quietly, even though she might not understand his words. His tone carried the meaning. The woman studied him for a long time. The crowd waited, whispering. Finally she spoke, her voice deep and steady, her accent thick but her words clear enough in human speech. "You risked yourself for my daughter?" Elias hesitated, then answered simply, "Yes." The woman's eyes narrowed slightly as if searching his face for lies. Then she held her daughter closer, her voice lowering. "Humans do not risk for us, not without reason." Elias gave a tired smile. "Sometimes Reason doesn't matter. She's a child. That was enough. The crowd murmured again. Some seemed moved. Others still distrusted him. But the girl clung to her mother, then peeked over her shoulder at Elias. Her glowing eyes softened. She whispered something in her own language. The woman tilted her head, listening. Then she looked at Elias again. She calls you Protector. Elias blinked. The title felt heavy. Protector, he repeated softly. The woman rose to her full height. She was regal, commanding, but her gaze held a strange intensity now. My name is Sirencia, she said. This is my daughter Lyra. You may have saved her life. But know this, trust among the Tyrell is not easily given. Elias met her eyes. I don't ask for trust, only that she lives. Sirencia studied him a moment longer, then turned, leading her daughter back into the camp. The crowd slowly dispersed, but whispers followed Elias as he stood alone by the fallen lifter. He should have walked away. He should have returned to his duty, left the Tyrell to their lives. That was what his commander wanted, what common sense demanded. But as he watched Sirencia disappear into the camp with Lyra, Elias felt something shift inside him. He had crossed an invisible line, and he knew, somehow, this was only the beginning. The night air on the colony world was sharp and cool. Fires burned in small circles across the Tyrell camp, their faint smoke drifting up toward the twin moons. Shadows moved slowly between tents and shelters. Voices carried, soft and musical, sometimes tense, sometimes sorrowful. Elias Ward sat at the edge of the camp, his back against a cracked stone wall. His arm was wrapped in a strip of cloth to stop the bleeding from the earlier rescue. He had ignored the sting all day, but now that silence had fallen, the ache reminded him of the risk he had taken. He stared at the stars above, wondering what his commander would say if he learned Elias had interfered with the Tyrell again. Probably a lecture, maybe worse. Humans were told to maintain distance, to keep professional boundaries. But Elias had never been very good at turning his back on people in need. A soft step on the ground broke his thoughts. When he looked up, she was there, Sirencia, the tall Tyrell woman with silver skin that seemed to glow in the moonlight. Her presence carried strength, yet her expression was unreadable. In her arms, her daughter Lyra slept, wrapped in a simple cloth blanket. Elias rose quickly, a little awkward, brushing dust from his trousers. Is she all right? He asked quietly, nodding toward the child. Sirencia studied him for a long moment before answering. She is safe. Because of you. There was no warmth in her voice, only truth. Elias gave a small nod, unsure what to say. You could have died, Sirencia continued, stepping closer. Her eyes glowed faintly blue in the moonlight. That machine, it would have crushed you too. Why risk yourself for one not your own? Elias sighed. He had asked himself that question earlier, but found no complicated answer. Because she deserved to live, he said simply. That was reason enough. Sirencia tilted her head slightly as if weighing his words. Among my people, to place oneself in danger for another is a great vow. It is not done lightly. I didn't think, Elias admitted, rubbing the back of his neck. I just acted. For the first time, Sirencia's lips curved faintly, almost a smile, though it was gone as quickly as it appeared. She lowered her gaze to her daughter. She calls you Protector. She has not called anyone that since her father died. The weight of her words struck Elias. He glanced at the sleeping child, small arms curled around the blanket. Protector. It was not a title he had sought, but it had been given freely and now it clung to him. I don't want to replace anyone, Elias said softly. I just wanted her safe. Sirencia looked at him again, her expression softening for a heartbeat. Perhaps. But now there is a debt. In our ways, such a debt cannot be ignored. Elias frowned slightly. Debt? You risked your life, she said firmly. We owe you for that. My people will not forget. He shook his head quickly. I don't need anything. You don't owe me. Sirencia's eyes narrowed. Do not dismiss our ways, human. Debt binds us. It is part of who we are. One day that bond will be called upon. Elias didn't argue further. He saw the resolve in her face and knew it would be pointless. He gave a quiet nod instead. All right, if that's how it has to be. She studied him again, silent for a moment. Then she shifted her daughter in her arms and turned to leave. But before she walked away, she stopped. Elias Ward, she said, his name sounding different on her tongue. You are an unusual human. I will watch you. Then she vanished into the shadows of the camp, leaving him alone with the weight of her words. The next day, Elias returned to his duties at the garrison. The supply depot needed repairs, and several vehicles were still half broken from the last storm. He worked with steady hands. The calm of the Tyrell camp lasted only a few days. The twin suns rose over the valley, spilling pale light across the tents, and the air was filled with quiet chatter, cooking fires, and the occasional laugh of children. But under the surface, tension simmered. Word had reached the camp that raider groups were moving through the region. These were not ordinary bandits. They were organized, ruthless, and their goal was simple: capture alien refugees and sell them for profit or use them as labor. The Tyrell, already vulnerable after the recent war, had no real defense. Elias Ward learned of the threat while working on a broken supply shuttle at the edge of the camp. Sparks flew as he welded a torn metal panel back into place, and Lyra watched him curiously from nearby. Her mother, Sirencia, stood a few meters away, arms crossed, observing both him and the camp. "They're coming," she said softly, her voice carrying an edge of authority. "The raiders are near. They will strike soon." Elias wiped sweat from his brow. "How soon?" "Too soon for comfort," Sirencia replied. "We may not be able to defend ourselves fully." The words hung in the air. Elias glanced at Lyra, who had pressed herself against her mother's leg. The girl's wide eyes were filled with fear. Elias's jaw tightened. He had faced danger before: storms, machinery failures, even skirmishes with hostile forces. But this was different. These raiders would not hesitate to kill, and Lyra, he could not let anything happen to her. "I'll help," he said firmly. Sirencia raised an eyebrow. "I mean it. I can fight. I can plan. I can protect her too." Sirencia studied him carefully. She knew his human weapons were powerful, but she also knew he could make mistakes. "You fight differently than my people," she said. "You act swiftly without hesitation. That can be an advantage or a weakness." Elias shrugged. "It's all I know." As night fell, the camp prepared for the worst. The Tyrell moved swiftly, setting up barriers and lookouts. Their language rang through the camp, crisp and melodic as they communicated plans. Humans in the garrison nearby hesitated to get involved. They had been told to leave the aliens alone, but Elias refused to wait for them. He patrolled the perimeter with a borrowed Tyrell rifle in hand. The weapon hummed softly, alien yet efficient, and he checked the tension in the straps of his pack. Lyra slept in a small makeshift cot near Sirencia, unaware of the danger yet protected by careful watch. Hours passed. Then, in the dead silence of the night, the first sounds of movement reached Elias's ears: soft footsteps on gravel, low mechanical whines. The raiders were here. Elias signaled the Tyrell guards. They crouched in shadows, their glowing eyes alert. Sirencia stepped beside him, her posture calm but deadly. She held a long staff, the polished metal gleaming under the twin moons. The raiders moved closer, their numbers larger than expected. They were heavily armed, and Elias could feel their menace even before seeing them fully. They were confident, expecting an easy strike. Elias tightened his grip on the rifle. "We can't let them take the camp," he whispered. "Not if I can stop it." Sirencia nodded. "Then we fight. Protect your people, and the child." The battle began suddenly. Raiders rushed from the shadows, shouting, their weapons blazing. Sparks flew as laser fire met Tyrell shields. Elias dove behind a partially destroyed wall, firing his rifle in bursts. His aim was steady, and every shot found its mark, sending raiders sprawling. Sirencia moved like a shadow, her staff cutting arcs through the attackers with deadly precision. Her movements were fluid, almost dancing, and yet each strike was lethal. The Tyrell guards followed her lead, coordinating silently, cutting off raiders' advances. Elias ducked a sweeping plasma blade. A raider lunged at him from the side. Without thinking, he threw a metal crate, knocking the attacker off balance. Then he charged, tackling the raider to the ground and taking his weapon. The human grit and Tyrell grace merged in the fight, creating a formidable defense. Through it all, Lyra slept, safe under a reinforced shelter Elias had built earlier. He cast a quick glance at her before returning to the fray, his heart pounding. Hours passed like minutes. The camp's defenses were holding, but the raiders adapted quickly, circling, trying to flank the defenders. One group broke through a weak barrier and charged toward Lyra's shelter. Elias saw them. His blood ran cold. "No," he shouted, sprinting. He fired his rifle with precision, but one raider ducked behind cover and aimed a plasma pistol at Lyra. Scifi noticed the threat and moved swiftly to intercept. "Get out of the way!" she commanded, and Elias hesitated only a fraction of a second before ducking. Her staff met the raider's pistol, shattering it in a shower of sparks. But the force of the strike sent her stumbling backward. Another raider rushed in. Elias reacted instinctively, tackling the attacker to the ground, sending him sliding across the dirt. The battle was chaotic, violent, and terrifying. Finally, Elias reached Lyra, scooping her into his arms. She looked up at him, eyes wide with fear. He whispered softly, "I've got you. You're safe." Her small hands gripped his arm tightly, trusting him completely. Scifi was beside him in an instant. She cut down the remaining raiders with unmatched skill, her eyes never leaving her daughter. When the last raider fell, silence returned to the camp. Only the crackle of fires and the labored breathing of defenders remained. The Tyrell and humans alike surveyed the battlefield. Several guards were wounded, but no lives had been lost. The raiders, beaten and demoralized, fled into the night. Elias lowered Lyra to the ground, brushing dirt from her hair. "Are you okay?" he asked gently. She nodded, too stunned to speak. Then she wrapped her small arms around him in a tight embrace. Elias smiled despite the exhaustion and pain in his body. Scifi stepped forward, her staff resting at her side. She looked at Elias with a mixture of awe and something else, something softer, almost warmth. "You risked your life. For my daughter and for us all," she said. "You fought like one of my own people, but also like no Tyrell could." Elias shook his head. "I didn't think. I just acted. I couldn't let her die." Scifi's eyes softened. "And because of that, you have changed our camp. You have changed me. That cannot be ignored." Elias felt a strange weight settle in his chest. Her words were not praise, they were something more. Something binding. He had acted out of instinct, out of a desire to protect. Yet now there was a debt being acknowledged, a connection being forged he had never expected. Lyra looked up at them both. She had recovered enough to smile. "Protector?" she whispered again. Elias glanced at Scifi. She nodded ever so slightly. The word carried meaning beyond simple protection. It was a promise, a bond, and it tied him to both mother and daughter in ways he had not imagined when he first walked into the camp. Outside, the twin moons shone over the valley, casting long shadows across the broken landscape. The battle had ended, but the consequences of that night would not fade quickly. The bond between human and Tyrell had begun, and with it came responsibility, danger, and perhaps something far deeper. Elias knew one thing for certain. He could never leave. Not now, not while the girl needed him, and not while Scifi's gaze lingered on him with quiet intensity. For the first time, he understood what it truly meant to risk it all, not just for survival, but for love, trust, and the fragile hope that humanity could touch alien lives in the most unexpected ways. The camp was quiet the next morning. Smoke from the remaining fires drifted lazily into the pale light of the twin suns, and the air carried the faint smell of burnt metal from last night's battle. Tents were patched, barricades rebuilt, and the wounded had been tended with careful hands. Elias Ward moved through the camp, checking on repairs and speaking quietly with Tyrell guards. He had fought beside them, protected them, and now they watched him with a mixture of respect and suspicion. He could feel the tension in their gazes. Not everyone was ready to trust a human so completely. Scifi appeared near the center of the camp, her eyes scanning the repaired defenses. She carried herself with her usual authority, but there was a shadow of worry beneath the calm. Elias approached her. "You fought well last night," she said quietly, her gaze meeting his. Elias shrugged. "I did what I had to do. They would have taken the child otherwise." She nodded slowly. "Yes, but now there is another problem. Some of my people, they question your presence. They say relying on a human weakens us, that you are an outsider who could leave at any time." Elias frowned. "I'm not leaving," he said firmly. "Not while they or Lyra need me." Scifi studied him, her expression unreadable. "Perhaps, but humans are not like us. Your ways are different. Your loyalties are uncertain. That is what my people fear." "I understand," Elias said quietly, "but I also know that I can fight and I can protect. That's all that matters right now." Scifi remained silent for a long moment, then spoke softly. "You are bold, human. Reckless, some would say. And yet, I see the truth in your heart. You care for my daughter as if she were your own." Elias glanced at Lyra, who was playing nearby with a small group of Tyrell children. She looked up at him and waved. The small gesture filled him with determination. He would not abandon them. Later that day, the whispers began. Some Tyrell elders approached Serencia, voices low but tense. "Mother, the human. He fights well, yes, but he is not of our kind. What if he leaves? What if he brings trouble? You risk your people's safety by trusting him." Serencia listened carefully. The days that followed were a mixture of calm and tension. The camp's fires burned steadily, casting long shadows across the tents and makeshift shelters. Repairs continued on broken buildings, and the Tyrell children played cautiously under the watchful eyes of their parents. Still, the threat of raiders hung over the valley like a dark cloud. Elias Ward moved through the camp, inspecting defenses, speaking quietly with Tyrell guards, and checking on Lyra whenever he could. The girl had grown accustomed to him, calling him protector, with a quiet confidence that tugged at his heart. He had become part of their daily life, though he had not yet admitted it to himself. Serencia observed him from a distance more than once, her gaze lingering on him as he worked tirelessly. He moved with care, not just for the camp but for her daughter, and that did not go unnoticed. Her respect for him had grown into something more complicated, something that made her heart tighten even as her mind remained cautious. One afternoon, while Elias was repairing a collapsed barricade at the edge of the camp, Lyra ran up to him. She had a small polished stone in her hand. "Protector!" she shouted, her voice full of excitement. Elias knelt, smiling. "Yes, little one?" She held out the stone. "For you. Keep it safe." He took the stone gently, turning it over in his palm. "Thank you," he said. "I will." Lyra's small hand brushed his arm. "You stay. Don't leave." Elias felt a warmth in his chest. He knelt to meet her glowing blue eyes. "I won't," he promised softly. "I'm here to protect you. That's my job." Lyra's smile was radiant, and Elias realized then that her trust had woven a bond stronger than anything he had expected. Protecting her was no longer just duty. It was personal. That evening, Serencia approached him quietly while the camp gathered near the central fire. She gestured for him to follow her to a quieter area. The stars above burned bright, and the twin moons reflected off the smooth surface of a nearby rock. "You have done more than protect my daughter," she said softly. "You have taught my people that humans can be trusted. You have shown courage where many would hesitate." Elias looked down, shrugging modestly. "I just do what I think is right." Her eyes searched his face. "It is more than that. You fight with heart, you care. That is something rare among your kind, and yet it is undeniable in you." Elias felt his chest tighten. Her gaze was intense, almost piercing, but not hostile. Something unspoken passed between them. A recognition of the bond that had formed not just with Lyra, but with her. Before he could reply, Lyra ran up from the camp, carrying a bundle of herbs and roots. She dropped them at Serencia's feet, then tugged Elias's hand. "Protector, help me!" she exclaimed, her small voice filled with excitement and mischief. Elias laughed softly, feeling a rare sense of peace in the chaotic world they inhabited. He took her hand and led her to the small shelter where Serencia taught them how to use the herbs to heal minor wounds. Over the next few days, the bond between Elias, Lyra, and Serencia strengthened further. Elias shared his knowledge of engineering and human technology with the Tyrell guards, showing them how to reinforce defenses and operate human weapons. In return, the Tyrell taught him their techniques: silent movement, precise strikes, and ways to anticipate an enemy. Lyra watched them both, fascinated. She mimicked the movements, laughing when she succeeded, her small hands reaching for Elias's whenever she stumbled. He corrected her gently, smiling down at her determination. Serencia noticed the way her daughter's face lit up around him, and the way Elias never hesitated to help. She also noticed the subtle changes in herself, how she sought his opinion, how she found herself grateful for his presence in ways she could not fully name. One evening, after a long day of training, Elias and Serencia walked along the edge of the camp. The valley stretched below them, peaceful for the moment, though danger always lingered on the horizon. "You are not like any human I have met," Serencia said quietly. "You care more than your duty demands." You risk more than your orders allow. And yet, you continue. Elias shrugged, looking out over the valley. I don't know why. Maybe it's instinct, maybe it's just who I am. Sirencia's eyes softened. Perhaps that is exactly why my daughter and my people need you. Not just your skills, but your heart. He turned to her, surprised by the honesty in her tone. You trust me that much? Her gaze met his, unwavering. I do, and I will not let you leave, not now. Not while my daughter, while my people depend on you. Elias felt the weight of her words. It was not a command, but a promise. And in that moment he realized he had already made his choice. He would stay. Not because he had to, but because he wanted to. That night the camp settled into a quiet rhythm. Fires glowed softly and the trail slept cautiously under watchful eyes. Elias kept a watch near Lyra's shelter, rifle in hand, though sleep tugged at his eyelids. Lyra stirred and crawled into his lap, her small arms wrapping around him. Protect her, she whispered, her voice barely audible. Elias held her gently. Yes, little one. I'm here. Sirencia stepped lightly to the side, watching them. Her expression was unreadable, but Elias felt her presence strong and steady. He looked up at her and she nodded once, a silent acknowledgement of the bond that had formed. It was no longer just protection. It was family, in a world that had none to spare. The following day, the scouts returned with troubling news. The raiders were regrouping, more organized and larger in number than before. They would strike again, and this time they would not show mercy. Elias met with Sirencia and the Tyrell guards to prepare. His human training and battlefield experience became vital. He coordinated defenses, helped set traps, and taught the Tyrell to anticipate enemy strategies. Sirencia moved alongside him, offering guidance and support, their combined leadership blending human and Tyrell strengths. Lyra watched from a safe distance, clutching a small charm she had made for Elias. The bond between them all had become undeniable, not just in words, but in actions, trust, and unspoken understanding. When the sun set behind the valley, Elias stood beside Sirencia on a small rise, looking down at the camp. We're ready, he said quietly. Sirencia nodded. Together we are stronger than any enemy. You have not only protected my daughter, you have united us all. Elias looked down at Lyra, asleep in the arms of another guard, and felt a sense of purpose he had never known before. The bond he had formed with mother and daughter was unbreakable. He would stand by them, fight for them, and protect them at any cost. And in that moment, he understood the truth of Sirencia's words. Some bonds are forged not by blood alone, but by courage, trust, and the choice to risk everything for those who cannot protect themselves. The camp was quiet, but the air held promise. For Elias, Sirencia, and Lyra, the bond they shared was no longer fragile. It was strong, enduring, and ready to face whatever threat the next day might bring. The valley lay in tense silence. The twin suns had barely risen, casting a pale orange glow across the camp. Trell and human defenders moved quietly, checking weapons, tightening barricades, and preparing for the inevitable. Today the raiders would return, and this time their attack would be relentless. Elias Ward stood near the central fire, watching the Tyrell guards organize in formations he had helped design. Every movement was precise, deliberate. His human instincts told him to plan for every possibility, every threat. But his heart reminded him of something far more important: Lyra and Sirencia. He had spent weeks with them, teaching, protecting, and learning. He had become part of their world, and now he faced a choice he had never imagined. He could stay, risking his life again, or retreat to the safety of the human garrison, leaving them to face danger alone. He looked down at Lyra, who slept peacefully in a tent nearby. Her small hands clutched a handmade charm she had given him. Protector, she called him, and in that single word Elias understood everything he needed to know. He would not leave. Sirencia approached him, her staff in hand, eyes glowing faintly with determination. They will come soon, she said quietly. And when they do, every choice matters. Every decision could mean life or death. Elias nodded. I know, but I'm ready. Her gaze softened for a moment, a flicker of something personal breaking through her usual stoicism. You are more than a protector now, she said. You are part of this family. You have shown loyalty, courage, and heart. That cannot be ignored. Elias met her eyes. I'm not leaving, not now. Not ever. A brief smile touched her lips. Good, then we fight together. And when this is over, We decide what comes next. Hours passed and the air grew tense. Scouts reported the raiders approaching from multiple directions. The valley echoed with the faint hum of engines and the distant clatter of metal. Elias took position with Serencia, standing at the heart of the camp, where their leadership could guide the defenders. Lyra was secured safely within the innermost shelters, her small eyes watching anxiously as the camp prepared. Elias glanced at her once, giving a reassuring nod. She smiled faintly and whispered, "Protector." The raiders emerged over the horizon, their numbers larger than expected. They shouted in harsh tones, weapons gleaming, and their formation suggested organized intent rather than chaotic assault. Elias's heart pounded, but he steeled himself. He had trained for this. He had prepared for this. And he had something far more powerful than weapons. The bond with Serencia and Lyra, the trust of